I've come back to my local woods again. Hadn't been to this piece before. It looks almost like there's a track through here, so that's why I'm exploring this. As I was coming through here, I did spot, first of all, this bit of old sort of like rotten branch, whatever there, and initially spotted these, which I presume are some form of a lichen or something like that. I don't know what these are. I don't know whether they're actually small mushrooms. I mean, there's a lot of them growing on leaves. They're just basically, if you look at them closely, they're just like a disc. Also on top of there, which unless you really pick the branch up properly and look at it closely, you get there's lots of these little shoots coming up from there. And that's what I'm concentrating on here at the moment. And I have had a bit of a wander around here, and there are some interesting things around here. So there's more of those similar sort of like disc things, and you just have to keep an eye on the ground. So they're here everywhere. And on here, that looks like, I don't know if there's actually a mushroom in there. Certainly a small black one in there. But it is really a case of hunting around, and there's some what looks like some old mushrooms on here. This trip is going to be concentrating more on macro more than anything, because even though it's midday, the sun is actually fairly low. I don't know if you can see it through the trees there. It's actually just peeping through the trees there. It is fairly overcast, even though I can see odd bits of blue sky. I mean, very small piece of blue sky above me. And at the same time as well, it's also rather breezy, so I'm not going to get, like in the last video, those options of reflections in any water. I have now actually just concentrated on one of those discs that's just there. So you can see how small this is by my end of my small finger. It's really weird. It's got like these minuscule hairs coming around the outside. There's an app you can use called Picture This, and you can identify, and I can use a picture from my library, so I can use that, stick that in the middle there, and it should go off and analyse what it is. If this is correct, then it looks like it's more of these mushrooms which you see about all over the place forming. This is what I find interesting about macro photography, or looking part of things, especially on the macro here with this, I'm going to call it a fungi. Please do say if you know different. But I'm looking at the early stages of a fungi growing, something that we'd never ever see, and you can see based on the size of my small finger just how small it is. It's probably less than a quarter of the size of my actual small fingernail. Again, like I spoke about in the last video about my style, perhaps this is my style of seeing these small areas in the larger picture that we don't normally see. I mean, a landscape photographer around here would normally be taking, for example, the whole scene, where when you look down there where my camera is, I'm looking at something that's probably no more than about 3mm wide on an old piece of branch. Now, somebody may well use that small piece of branch as a foreground in their larger landscape image, and that's where I've concentrated on that smaller part of the picture. I've come through the thick of the woods here, just trying to find any sort of a trail to come through, and come across this fallen branch tree here, and it's just full of all this fungi here. I believe, according to the Plant Finder app, this is called turkey tail, but it's when you get underneath that you really see the difference. So I've got the camera set up here, literally right under, pointing up, and I've took one image so far, which I'm quite quite pleased with, but I'm not sure whether it needs some form of fill-in lighting, so I may well just give this a go with a bit of lighting to just see what sort of difference that I get on here. I'm literally right next to the roadway here, and I did pass a very, very slow, sort of like narrow sort of stream further up in the woods, which was a fraction of this, and it's obviously where it's all coming down to go out under the roadway through the other side. So I was looking to find where I can cross this stream, but when I come down the bottom here, I come across this, and this is this turkey tail fungi again, and it's absolutely smothered all over this tree. So it's a bit hard to photograph. Again, do you go for a big portion, which I did take a big section in the middle here, but I've also just concentrated on this small section on the top here, again to shoot underneath and fill a bit of light in from the bottom. And the stacking the camera has done is, it's sort of not done it perfectly, especially on the bottom half of the image, but the top half looks a lot better, so I may well just crop that. Turned around, and this is also covered in it, as well as this. So again, you could have probably a fairly nice, I suppose 16:9 image or something across the whole width here. As humans, because we're so tall, we're looking down on these. So if I turn this camera upside down, hopefully you're seeing a totally different viewpoint of all these fungi growing wherever they can. And I'm surprised at the masses that are actually under this branch as well. So there's another piece all along there, and they go up onto this one, and I can see them carrying on onto there as well. But while I'm here, in actual fact, we've got this little stream here. Don't know whether I'll be able to pick out an image while I'm here of the running water. I mean, it looks like I've got a slightly nicer little waterfall up there, rather this one looks really, really messy with all the twigs and everything down there. This is the first little waterfall I see, and you can see there's a lot of branches and debris and everything in there. It just looks a little bit messy. And if you'd watched my recent video where I went into Gelt Woods with the river there, I mentioned about it being very peaty, and here again you can see the water is quite brown, so it's just generally this area is all quite peaty. But this is the other waterfall I was looking at. I've still got my 100mm macro lens on here, as it works out a real treat for this particular sort of setup. I've tried a couple of images on here. First of all, just with the lens as it was, I was doing with the macro photography, but I've also just stuck on my variable neutral density filter. Not only the neutral density, but it's got a built-in polarizer on it. Where the water is on the left-hand side here, you get an awful lot of glare without the polarizing filter, but by tuning the polarizing filter in, I've took out most of the glare on there. Because I've got a fair bit of depth of field I'm trying to cover in here as well, from this overhanging fir right at the very bottom of the video here, right the way up through the waterfall and the branches behind, I've had to use stacked images again, but this time I've gone for 10 stacked images. Just walking around further and come across this leaf, which has got another one of these fungo type things on it, and it was just laid over there, but I just put it on this like mossy type area because it was so much brighter with the contrast, and just took a picture to start with of the whole thing because I just thought it looked really, really nice. I thought, right, well, I will get a macro shot of this as well. So I did take one without the lighting, and I've just put both of my lights on. So this one here is pretty high at about 7000K, just to give a little bit of fill-in light on the top there, just to brighten the whole image up, and brought this one in to give a bit of colour and I suppose shade to the piece as well. Having side lighting does bring out the texture on an item. What have I got from today's trip? I didn't plan to walk where I've walked today. I knew today's weather wasn't going to be great. I knew the light wasn't going to be bright, fairly overcast, which it has been all the time. So I didn't think that I could probably go for the landscapes, and following probably from the last video where I did a few macro shots, I thought, right, I'm going to this time look for those smaller images, not necessarily macro photography of fungi like I've been doing a lot of the time. It was a case of looking for those small little things that we don't normally see, like the little shoots coming out of that branch that I got on one of my first images. Even on this last image with the, I'm guessing it's some form of a fungi, it just looks like a ball that I found on a leaf. You hunt around on the floor and you do spot all these little things everywhere, but it's sometimes that the initial thing before I even spotted that was it was the leaf. The leaf I picked up and I thought, well, this actually looks, it's on its own, but I wanted to put it onto something a bit more contrasty, brighter, so that it just stood out. And again, it's those little things that we don't normally see, because we're walking along at eye level, 5-6 foot high, and when you naturally walk along, you're looking probably a minimum 6 feet ahead of you and into the distance. So you don't necessarily look at what's down at your feet. But at the same time as well, even though I took out my big lens out of the bag, because I just knew there was no way I'm going to be using a 150 to 600mm lens today, I kept everything else, and I'm pleased I did, even though the only other thing I've really used is my filters, because I could fortunately still use the 100mm macro, was that all of a sudden I found that little stream with little waterfalls. So again, it was moving away from the macro. It's the important thing, I think, is that you've got to be versatile. Don't necessarily just come out with one thing in mind, that you're going to shoot macro, say fungi or something like that. Be more versatile and on the lookout for anything else that looks of interest. Be interested to hear your thoughts on the images that I've done, and thanks a lot for watching.